So tet means something else besides the picture of the snake or the coil or the sword and the spear, or the sword and the shield, excuse me. It has to do with turning. So the picture, if you literally look up in the words that start with the letter tet in the Red Dictionary or any other dictionary, the concordance, you'll see that it has something to do with something spinning, something revolving. And so there's all these different words that have to do with either a full basket or turning or this offense and defense, like this snake with the coil and the fangs. So here you have like a clock, like the hours on the clock as the day turns around, or the turning of the festivals in the year, or the turning of the seasons. These are all tet concepts. The fact that you have a belt that goes around you is also a picture of the tet. So you could say, here's like the belt buckle and it goes around. Well, that's a modern picture, and it couples back up at with the belt hook. The concepts in the letter tet from people, if you look on the internet or in other books about people who study the letters, they'll tell you that the letter tet, meaning coming back around, is the essential equivalent of 100%. It's the full circle, it's the full basket, it's the full calendar year, it's the full series of the 7 festivals, it's the full 7-day week, as it were. Being such, it's like the helm of a ship for steering, but it's kind of like this idea of a full 360 degrees. It's going all the way around and coming back to where you began. This is the concept in the tet. So not only do you see the picture within the tet, the picture, as it were, of the offense and the defense. In other words, if you read Psalm 35, and so one of the things I've tried to do each week is show you different scriptures where the concepts of the letters are embedded in the story or the narrative or the sentiments. If you read Psalms 35, David talks about how coming to Yahweh is his high tower, his defense, his shield, and how he pleads with Yahweh to just nail his enemies, and he nails them in a certain way. He says, what they have done to me, with the measure they have used, with the trap, the snare, the pit that they have dug for me to fall into, may you make them fall into their own trip. Well, we talked about this thing with the Vav and the Zion in the previous weeks, that's exactly the mechanism that Yahweh uses. We design our own repercussions. The measure that we use is measured to us. And if you look at Psalm 35, you realize David figured this out. And furthermore, what David says in Psalm 35, he says, listen, when these guys were having trouble, I was praying for them. And they turned around and they're gloating after my hardship. They're laughing they're scorning me. May you return my prayers onto my own head, and may you bring their ways upon their own head. There's something about this which is this reciprocal. Remember we said the Vav in the Paleo, the Vav like this is kind of shaped like, here's the balance, and if you put weight here, so this, it's kind of like scales, which actually lines up with the letter Ayin, but you put a certain measure in here, and it tips, and it's counterbalanced by Yahweh seeing to it that, okay, he's going to return the ways of man upon his own head. The reason for coming to the Torah is not a system of ordinances put upon us, but it's Yahweh saying this: I designed the world so that whatever you do comes back on you. That's the way it works. It's like the dead man chained to you. Who put the dead man on you? Well, it was the Romans. It was the devil. No, you put him on yourself is the way it works. You chain the dead man to yourself. How do you get free of the dead man? Start doing what the Torah said. Because when you start doing what the Torah said, which is pure and righteousness and clean, what starts happening to you? The repercussions of what you just did, which is the righteousness and pure, clean ways. For your good, for your health, for your sound clarity, for your sanity, for what goes around comes around. You know, some people call it karma. Ooh, that's an Eastern mysticism. No, that's where the Easterners got it right. Now, I don't know the religious system of karma, but I do know that what you plant, you will reap. Even Yeshua talked about that, and it's Torah. The ways of man come back upon him multiplied. And you could say, well, like your wheel on your car runs into the mud puddle, how many more times is that mud going to track on the road, or it runs into paint sometimes spilled on the highway? How many more times does it come around? It's not just once. Whatever we do is going to come back. So if we do the commandments of the Torah, what comes back is the benefits of the Torah. Every time we think we can get away with something, and so maybe he won't see, and we'll do this or we do that, which is counter to Yahweh's ways, it comes back on us. So he tells his people, I designed this place, this is what works. If you do each other justice, then what comes back to you is justice. And if you think you're going to rip somebody off and you're going to sneak this little thing in here, it's going to come back more than once. It's too expensive. This one time, this neighbor kid, years ago, he had an M80, and he said, hey, let's go blow up somebody's mailbox. And I thought about it and thought, it's too expensive. I can't. Because when I get older, how many times will I have to replace a mailbox that some punk kids decide to blow up or hit with a baseball bat the way they do? It's like 40 mailboxes I'm going to have to go buy now just because one time when I was young I decided to blow up a mailbox with somebody who didn't know any better? No thanks, I can't do it. I didn't do it. It's like because I was trained to regard the scriptures, but it wasn't like, oh yes, I'll be kind to my neighbor. It's like, no, I don't want to buy 40 mailboxes or whatever it might take. It's the same difference, whether you do it for the positive reason of being benevolent or whether you do it for the negative reason is I don't want to pay the cost. You know, it's the shield and the spear. It's the whisper, it's the shout. You know, it's like whatever we do, whatever it takes, let's just figure out the way this place works so that we can manipulate to our benefit. And Yahweh says, and again, I've been reading all these things, I've got them written down, but I can't find them off the top of my head, but it's either in Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Hosea. He says, my people are wise when it comes to evil. They know how to figure and manipulate and nail this guy with these words and this legal system and that, you know, changing the property lines and all this stuff. He says, but when it comes to righteousness, they're stupid. It's like, why? What does that mean? We don't even know what that means. What it means, I believe, is that if we knew how to work righteousness to our benefit, that's a whole different ballgame. Now we're doing things. For example, and I told this story once a long time ago, I'll say it again. Me and a friend were outside my brother's office in the parking lot. I was talking to him about something, and this guy drove up who was also working on the building, and he was really rude. This guy deserved to get just punched out. He said something like, nobody wants to hear it, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, boy, if there was this other guy that sometimes worked with us, if he was with us, we would have had a fight, and that guy would have had his head in the pavement, because I know that this other friend wouldn't have put up with it. And this guy was so rude and so insulting, it just infuriated me. And I noticed he was parked in the handicap zone. And across the street on the other side of the building was the police station. And I thought, man, I should call and get this guy busted. Perfectly legal, perfectly right. He was breaking the law. I'm within all, and even though he worked in the building, that's no excuse for parking in the handicap zone. And then the thought came to me, blessed are the merciful, because they will receive mercy. So in other words, you know, there's this movie that came out years ago called Pay It Forward. It was a whole different notion, but very similar. In other words, I think that Yahweh says, oh, you want mercy? You want me to give you mercy? Well, the way the system is designed, I can't just say, oh, I like you, I think you're a nice person today, here, I'll give you some mercy. He says, no, here, see these scales? If you want mercy tomorrow, he's going to give us a situation where today we can dump mercy in this scale. Now, we don't know that we're going to need mercy tomorrow, but he's going to give us a situation like that jerk next to me and says, what measure are you going to use? Your choice. Now, we had to talk earlier, no man's tempted by Yahweh. I'm not saying we're tempted by Yahweh. Yahweh provides us circumstances, situations, and opportunities where we then get to choose what we're going to do that sets up the ramifications for later on in our life. Adam and Eve were given the opportunity to say, hey, you want to eat that fruit that Yahweh said not to? Oh, no way, man, I'm not going to do that. But they said, well, wait a minute, it doesn't look so bad. Looks like it smells good, looks good. They rationalized, they bit themselves. Oh, the devil made them do it. I don't know who made them do it. They did it to themselves, and Yahweh said, okay, you stung yourself, now you're in big trouble. I told you you didn't have to. But the occasion was provided. What might have happened if they had refrained? Well, we'll never know that story. All we see is the story of what happened because they did. So if you want to set yourself up for something good in life, scan your circumstances and look for the occasions to implement Yahweh's ways into the circumstances. You get a lawyer on your tail and it's like, now what do you do about that guy? That's a whole other situation. It's a dangerous game. But he said, my people are stupid when it comes to righteousness, and that's the word used in the translation, which is why I'm saying the word stupid, but foolish, ignorant maybe. But the point is, he says they're wise when it comes to corruption. Why? Because they take great lengths to strategize and manipulate the spinning and the twisting of words. The word attorney apparently literally means the one who turns words, and that's a whole other thing. But the point is, we spin words. Politicians spin words. Have the words been spun on us to keep us from the covenant? If we knew how to work the system for our good, how would we live our life differently? What would we do? The reason to keep Shabbat and the festivals, the seventh day and the seven Moedim, are to try to play into doing righteousness rightly so that we get the reward. I'm not trying to disparage anybody having fun on Christmas, on Easter, on Halloween, on Sunday. We were discussing earlier, I'm not criticizing anybody for worshiping on Sunday. You can worship any day. You're supposed to rest on Shabbat. And if somebody says, get off my back, it's like, hey, fine, do whatever you want. But there's a blessing on resting on the Shabbat, like no other day. And if we're told otherwise, as a matter of fact, Constantine made it illegal to rest on Shabbat, therefore he robbed us of the blessing. And if we perpetuate the myth or the lie or the fairy tale that it doesn't matter, we are perpetuating the lie and we're perpetuating the thievery, the pillaging of the wealth of our treasure, which is in the Mishkan, which is the covenant of Yahweh given to his people. That's the reason for doing this stuff. So, I maintain that there's something about these words which are our blessing, which is our treasure, which is our wealth. And there's countless examples. I was going to talk about the stuff in the book of Hosea. I mentioned Psalm 35 as being an example of David referencing the shield and the spear as being the shield and the sword, or whichever, the offensive and defensive benefits of being in Yahweh's kingdom. Read Psalm 35 and you'll see it pretty eloquently expressed. If you look at Deuteronomy 33, it happens to be right after the Song of Moses, and it's the last words of Moses. Now, what did Moses try to tell us here? These are the last words of Moses. I'll back up a verse. A couple verses. He goes through all 12 tribes, and then he says this. May your borders be sealed like iron and copper, and like the days of your prime, so may your old age be. Is that coming back full circle? Like it was in your youth? Or is he talking about Israel here? now? Is he saying, hey, in the later days, we should have, as Israel, the prestige, the preeminence, the prominence, the blessing of Yahweh like in the very beginning? There is none like Elohim, O Yeshurun. Now the word Yeshurun, if you look earlier, it says in the Song of Moses, it says Yeshurun got fat and kicked, but Yeshur, Yeshar is the word to be straight, and Vav Nun is the suffix at the end of Yesharun, is one who walks the straight path. There's none like Elohim, O Yeshurun. Picture now Yahweh. Say he's busy doing something over at the Andromeda Nebula, and suddenly one of his own calls for his attention. He rides across heaven to help you, and in his majesty through the upper heights. Whatever it is Yahweh is doing, those who walk the straight path, he will run in his, as it were, this picture of in his chariots with his zavot, his hosts, running across the heavens to come to our assistance. This is the picture of the one that we are looking to in the Mishkan. That is the abode of Elohim immemorial, and below are the world's mighty ones. He drove the enemy away from before you. Remember, this is Moses' words to Israel, his last words. And he said, destroy. Thus Israel shall dwell securely, solitary, in the likeness of Jacob, in a land of grain and wine, even his heavens shall drip with dew. We could take some time to analyze that, but it's all a picture of great blessing. Fortunate are you, O Israel. Who is like you? This word mikamoka, who is like you, is said of Yahweh, and now Moses is saying this about Israel. What did he have as a vision for his people that even his people couldn't have a vision for, that we have been denied the vision of? Who is like you? O people delivered. Picture the weapons of Yahweh running across the heavens to come to the defense, the offense, and the defense of his people. Again, read Psalm 35 of David. O people delivered by Yahweh, the shield of your help, who is the sword of your grandeur. Your foes will try to deceive you, but you will trample their haughty ones. Now, wait a second. The last words of Moses, he was warning his people, your foes will try to deceive you. This word deceive is on page 275. If we should go there, but it has to do, it's on 275 of the dictionary, that's a whole other thing. I want to get to this. It has to do with rational, logical, convincing of Israel that whatever it is they thought was going to happen isn't going to happen. It's been done away with. It's lost. Oh, you can't do that. It's impossible. He never meant for you to. We can't. He gave us a new one. He gave us a new covenant. He's not interested in that old one anymore. Your foes will try to deceive you. Well, let's look at this verse here. This happens to be Psalm 29:9. And I want to show you a little example of what it might mean for our foes to try to deceive us. But I'm not going to say that our foes are responsible here. I'm going to say translators with good intention somehow did the best they could, but how does it compare to looking at the actual words of Yahweh? The reason for this class is to give yourself the empowering to look at these words, use the dictionary, whatever benefit my personal studies are making this chart is, what can we see in these words? This is translated. All of Psalm 29 has to do with the effect of Yahweh's voice. Read the whole chapter. It's not very long, a dozen verses or so. But in verse 9 it says, three different translations. It says, the voice of Yahweh makes the deer give birth. Okay. But another translation says, the voice of Yahweh frightens the hinds. Frightens the hinds or makes a deer give birth? Which is it? Another translation says it makes the oak tree twist. And another translation says it's not just that the deer gives birth, it's the stag give birth. It's like, was the stag pregnant? Oh, or at the voice of Yahweh, did the stag suddenly become impregnated and actually calve and cough up It's like, what in the heck is going on here? Why is it that the translators can't figure out what these words mean? These are those words. Furthermore, the rest of the verse says, and strips the forest bare, while in his temple all will proclaim glory. Okay, so I've heard it said that when Yahweh's voice on Mount Sinai proclaimed the 10 Commandments, it went forth, his voice like a wind went forth and stripped the bark off of trees and caused male deer to give birth. Really? That's what they say. I happen to be wearing an elk skin. The reason for this elk skin is it's not only like a tunic of someone who would be wearing a shield and sword. Elk? What's the word elk in Hebrew? Well, it's not exactly elk. But ayil is the word for stag. Ayil. And if you go to look up the word ayilk, spelled Aleph, Yod, Lamed, Kaf, which is pretty close, ayilk, it means your strength, because the Kaf at the end basically means you or your. And ayil happens, if you look in the dictionary, it basically means ram, head, chief, leader, projecting pillar, or a pilaster. It's like a projecting pillar, a ram. Well, this says kol, that's the voice. You can look up any of these words in the dictionary or in concordance. Kol is the voice of Yahweh. Now here's a word which we'll look at in a minute, ayilot. Well, the word ayil with a hey is the feminine form. Ayilah would be a female deer. Ayilot is the plural of what? A female deer? Or is it the plural of stags? Or is it a singular stag? Which is it? Why is it they can't tell? Why is it that they think it might mean an oak tree? Or why is it that they might mean that this word means frightening the hinds? Or is this word, does it mean to turn? My point is, these translators don't have a very good idea of what's going on. So you, if you're listening to this class, you get the dictionary, you study what these letters mean, you're going to be at least as adept, if not more so, than any of these translators that for the past 2,000 years, or 3,000 since this was written, that we've been trusting. And I'll show you how to do it. This word ayil can also mean hart, stag, or deer. An elk is, you might say, not just a regular deer, but an elk. He's got quite a rack on, and he's like the strong one of the forest. Ayilk, the strength, the strong one. Is that where we get the word elk? Is that Hebrew for ayilk? It's also the word it shows you in the dictionary for a grape worm, or one that twists or turns or rolls. It's like, well, wait a minute. So if this word twist and turn is like grape worm, something which is turnable, what's this word? Because if he says the strong one turns, then this isn't the turning, that's the but it's like, well, wait a minute. So these words play off each other is what I'm trying to show you. Ayilah is also a hind or a doe, but ayilo, and remember, as I tried to tell you a couple weeks ago, the vav is a masculine ending, the hey is a feminine ending, so ayilo, it actually means witch, W-H-I-C-H. Like, which one is he talking about? So how do you get the word for ram or head or chief or oak? It's the strong one of its kind. So you could say strong ones. At the voice of Yahweh, strong ones. Well, this is the noun, then this is the verb. See, the grammatical structure in Hebrew is a little different. Well, then you have to look back at this word here. Well, the yod is a prefix, basically means he will. And then you look at ket, vav, lamed, lamed. It doesn't exist in the dictionary. Oh, great. Now what do we do? Well, remember that the letter vav can act as a wild card, so technically the root of the word can be read as ket, lamed, lamed, but you can also look at this word, ket, vav, lamed. If you look in the dictionary, ket, vav, lamed is on this, it's another form of writing Het Yod Lamed. Heil, like the Germans. Heil Hitler. What were they saying? It means to move in a circle. The word hula, the hula dance that they do in Hawaii, means to move in a circle, whirl, or dance. It also means sand. So to do the hula on the sandy beach, telling a story, is the word hul in Hebrew. But it also means to start, to enter, to prosper. It's also trembling fear. Het Lamed Lamed, as the word used in Ezekiel 36:23, means to lose, to profane, defile, polluted, violated, rendered common, was redeemed, which is the opposite. Again, Yeshua was rendered common, but he provided our redemption. So you see that you could play with these words and find all these different connections. It means to begin. It also means to hollow out, bore holes, play the flute, which is the instrument with holes. It's a person slain or totally wounded. A hollow cavity, an empty space. Why am I reading all these things? Het Vav Lamed also means travail or be in anguish. It means fear, tremble, shake in pain. Oh, it's Het Vav Lamed. That's why they say the deer is frightened. What they've done is they've said, well, forget the double Lamed there. The root of this might be fear or tremble. But it also means to begin, which is kind of like giving birth. It also means... Het Vav Lamed and Het Yod Lamed means wealth, virtuous, valor, worth, able, an army, a band of men or a host, a substance or might. And it's like, you can't remember all these things. It's a picture. When somebody says, Heil Hitler, they're proclaiming that they are the army of his might. So it has to do with force, power, a rampart, bulwarks, a trench or a moat. It also has to do with sorrow. Again, you get these pictures of the Mishkan fence with a moat around it, with the army either besieging it, and it's a bulwark that they set, a rampart that they put up against it, or Yahweh who's our defense and our shield against anybody who would come against us. If we're inside, you've got this picture of this military action. What has that got to do with an oak tree turning or twisting or giving birth or a deer being frightened at the voice of Yahweh? All this has to do with this military action. Well, let's go back on. Remember, it says, and strips the forest bare. The point is here, if you look at the word for Yod Het Shin, it has to do with genealogy or to trace a descent of your heritage. But if you look at the word Het Shin Pei, it has to do with uncover, lay bare, or to strip off. To strip off the covering. Now you could say, okay, well, Yod is a prefix, so it means he will strip off, like strip off the bark from the trees. But it's like, what if you combine both of these words? And again, we were talking about this a little bit earlier in the way of dissecting the words. Is he saying, perhaps he will strip off the covering of your hidden genealogy? What's your hidden genealogy? Your hidden heritage of being the people of Israel, perhaps? Perhaps. After all, this is all about the kingdom of Yahweh, and this is all about his Mishkan, and then this is all about the redemption of Yeshua to bring us back into the covenant to receive the blessings. That's the bottom line of this story. So you can take these words any number of different directions, that he was talking about deers in the forest, or oak trees, or different stories through history, or is he talking about us today, that we've been tricked and led to believe because our enemies were going to try to fool us to throw away the covenant because they knew they couldn't take it from us. But if they convince us, the two voices, remember, oh, you don't want that old thing. It's of no use to you. That's one voice. Just throw it away. It's of no value. The other voice is, you better not pick that up. We're going to kill you. Those are the two voices that have been down through history. Constantine and the Inquisition and the Holocaust was all about anybody who kept Sabbath day, they would torture and kill. They would dispossess them. They'd torture their families. And we were threatened if we would keep the Sabbath day and the festivals. And if we learned anything Hebrew, they were threatened with very serious consequences. And it actually, it went through. Why didn't Yahweh save those people? Were they still under the umbrella of the curse? If we're outside the umbrella of the 2,730-year curse, I think that things are different now than before, which is why I'm suggesting we pick up this standard of the kingdom and go back to the ways of the Torah. I'm fully expecting that the threats of all kinds of persecution will come upon us, but I'm expecting victory b'Shem Yahweh here. I'm not expecting another picture of the Holocaust or the Inquisition. I'm expecting them to try it, but I'm expecting Yahweh to come to our defense. That's what this is about. Amen. So this next word, Yod Ayin Resh, means forest or woods, but it's also sylvan or honeycomb, which is to say a thick woods, so thick that you can't see anything. It's difficult to see. It's difficult to understand. That's what this means. So it's not just, gee, he will strip the forest bare. He will uncover something that is so obscured and entangled by thorns and hedges that no sense have been able to be made out of it. And yet this word here, Ayin Resh, is the word for a watcher, vigilant, like a guard at the gates, like the black watch robe of looking well to do what he said. And it also means here lively, diligent, and wakeful. Because when you give the plural, it's like adding the Vav Tav or the Yod Mem, which is the highest form of its kind. If you come down here to the next word, Bet is a prefix that can mean in, but Bet He Yod He, Bet He Yod, oh, that's a Yod Kaf. But remember, you can add the He, which means that which is revealed. Kaf at the end can mean your. So if you could put this here, that means to be astonished or amazed. And if you say it's with a kaf, that means, well, that's your astonishment, your amazement. But this word, He Yod Kaf Lamed, would be Hechal, is technically the great house. It's translated as the palace or the temple. But you say, we're not talking about an architectural building that Herod the Great or that some Turk or that some crusader built over in Jerusalem. We're talking about the great house, Yahweh's Mishkan. That's what we're talking about. So when he talks about He Yod Kaf Lamed, He Yod has to do with behold, here is, and then Kaf Lamed literally means all. But Haika, He Yod Kaf, literally is the word that means how. Is he saying that the idea of how to do this is to regard all the stuff that he is the vav as the suffix, that he built in his hechal, in his great house? You want entrance to the great house? As I said previously, for the prodigal son to come back to the father's house and eat the food set on the table. What's the food set on the table? All this stuff. This is what we're supposed to be eating up, like our manna, which gives us strength. And there's another verse that it talks about that he gave Israel the food of angels. But the word angels there is not melach. It was the food of, I believe it was the word ailim, which is the food of the great ones. He gave his people food, as it were, from heaven, that would surpass the strength of anything their enemies had. Wasn't it Elijah who was given a bite to eat, and the Melech, the angel, said, hey, you should eat a little bit more, the journey's pretty tough for you. And he ate again, and he ran for 40 days without eating? I mean, we've got some good stuff here if we can appropriate the imagery into our reality. This word here, Kaf Lamed, if it's Kaf Lamed He or Kaf Lamed Aleph, it means, Kaf Lamed Aleph, Kala means hold, restrain. Now picture this. Kaf Lamed Aleph means hold or restrain. But it also means to crossbreed, which is to hybridize. It also means to imprison the genetics. Imprisoning the genetics. Do you know that Monsanto and other people right now around the world are trying to hybridize and make it illegal to grow regular seeds? This year, apparently, they're coming out with seedless tomatoes so that you can't eat. They've hybridized the words, and if he's talking about hybridizing genetics, of course, that's Kaf Lamed Aleph, and this Kaf Lamed Vav, but what if they hybridized all of his stuff? Does this go back to the first word here having to do with this word here having to do with the genealogical descent? We've all been hybridized. We've all had our genealogical descent compromised. And would it amaze us and astonish us? All. Amer is the word to say, but it's also high, words, speech, or utterance. Amara has to do with takeoff or flight and revolt. And you picture the horns on an elk, these great high things that stick up in the majesty of the elk. The majesty of the Ayil is what Yahweh promised Israel. The blessing was that they would have a renown across the face of the earth, that no other people would be like them. They just had to regard the words of the Torah, and they would not. What is this verse saying? This last word here is the word kavod, kaf bet vav dalet. And it literally means honor, splendor, glory, abundance, riches, importance, glorious and stately. It's also to offer refreshments. It also means sweeping, or to treat a place with honor by sweeping it, is the picture. It's also the word for liver, which is heavy. It's the heavy organ. Weight, gravity, abundance, multitude, but it's also a difficulty. Oh, that's a pretty heavy thing to bear. It's like, oh, those Torah instructions are too heavy. They're burdensome. It means to grow worse. But if you break this word down, this letter as a prefix means like, and then bet vav dalet, again, by use of the dictionary, you realize that Adam was alone. He was bet dalet, bad. It wasn't tov, it wasn't good for Adam to be bad. Because bet dalet means alone or separated or unique. If you look for the word bet vav dalet, you won't find it as such, but remember, like ayin dalet is a witness, ayin vav dalet is to say something again and again and again repeatedly. It's when you put a vav in between it, it makes it somehow stronger or more emphatic. So if you put a bet vav dalet, if you break it, part of the use of the dictionary is you remember you use yods and vavs like wild cards. You can pull them out, but you have to look. You have to go around and study. You have to put your beanie on. Bean, bet yod noon, Strong's number 995 means to ponder, think, meditate, evaluate, consider, process. Bean, get your beanie going. That word bean means to think and to consider. Ponder these things. What is he saying? The word bone is the structure of the house, is the structure of the body. Think about these things is the structure of the kingdom. He wants us to think. It's the way the kingdom is built, is by putting together, pondering these words and letters. If we've been told it doesn't matter, throw it away, it'll do you no good. Oh, it's too hard for you, you'll never figure out Hebrew. Oh, we got Greek, that was the authorized language. Oh, Latin, it's sacred. Oh, English, it's the common universal tongue. But it's not Hebrew. He gave it to us in Hebrew. And in Hebrew is the answer to the mysteries of what did Yahweh say. And who did he say it to? He didn't say it to the church. Sorry, the church didn't exist. He said it to Israel. And he said to Israel, you will have this regard. So if you look at the word bet vav dalet, and you add an aleph yod, well, now why would you add an aleph yod? Because if you look at the word bet vav dalet in the dictionary, you won't find it. But you will find that word, and what it means is undoubtedly, certainly. Undoubtedly, certainly, what? Then if you look at the word for aleph yod, and it basically means an island. It means if, it means not. Where? It's like, what's the fat chance of finding a remote island in the middle of the ocean when you don't have a compass and you don't have any navigational skills? It's kind of like that. I'm saying, are we ever going to find our way back? Are we ever going to bring this thing full circle? Are we ever going to come back to the covenant? Not likely. There's other verses which say exactly those words. It's not likely that the people of Israel will ever come back to keep the covenant. The reason for this class is to say, we can change that. We, whoever's listening, whoever wants to hear, whoever wants to Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, the word Echad is unified or one, who Yahweh who brings it all together in one basket. And if you look at Deuteronomy 33, where Moses' last words, he's talking about the tribes of Israel, Yod Chet Dalet, Echad, unified. And then there's a different way to read what he says to those tribes. If you read it in English, you'll get one rendition. But if you look at the words of the letters, there's another way to read it. What I'm suggesting here is that if you read this, he's saying, at the voice of Yahweh, the strong man, you might say, only at the voice of Yahweh, the strong one will turn. Keep your head until the voice of Yahweh says to turn, and then you'll turn. Only at his voice will you veer off your path, and you will veer off the path that he tells you to veer off to. But even if the path has gotten turned around on us, at the voice of Yahweh, he will turn around and bring back the full circle, boomerang. He will gimel back to us the relationship between the Gimel and the Ted. He will bring back to us the ayalot, the prestige that he promised to our genealogical parents, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes. What he promised them to be for the people in the later days of the descendants of Israel, he promised to bring back if and conditional upon. See, the word aleph mem means on condition of, but it's also if. And whenever you see the word if, quite often it's followed by this word kaf yod, which is he, which means then, or thus, or therefore, or as per the conditional if that you just did. Quite often, if you read in English where you'll see if, sometimes you'll see it says if, and then when it says then, and I look, and there is no word then. It's supplied. So again, you don't know how to read it. But quite often Yahweh says, with the measure that you did this, this is what's going to happen. And you realize that this is the statement all through here. He says, this is the way it works. Like the yoke. There's the Vav, there's the Zion. Here's the Zion. If you guys turn away from my covenant, I turn away from you. Not because I'm turning away from you, because you turned away from me, and the weapon will come down upon you from your enemies. But if you turn back, I will put the weapon on your enemies. That's the deal. That's the terms. Why is Israel going through all kinds of heck right now in the Promised Land? How many of them are turning to the Torah of Yod He Vav He? Not just the teachings of the rabbis, but the Torah of Yod He Vav He. How many? How many does it take? How many of who, with what heart, does it take doing what for how long before Yahweh himself will step in and be our defense and our shield and our sword against our adversaries to maintain his kingdom? You read all through the scriptures and you'll find this lesson again and again and again in every book. Yahweh defends his people and his kingdom and his word. That's our promise. That's the promise that's in the basket that we come into the Mishkan for that promise. But we have to do our part. So if we read this verse, boy, you can hardly read that. So I think he will restore the turning around, the ayil, the prestige, the prominence that he will strip off the difficulty of seeing. He will uncover the promises that he gave to our ancient genealogical predecessors, that is astonishing and amazing, of how in his Mishkan, that which has been confined and imprisoned and cross-breeded and hybridized, he will speak like the unique promise that he originally gave to Israel, that they should have the honor and the splendor and the glory, the abundance and the riches and the glorious, stately refreshing that he promised. See, that's another way to read those verses. And it seems to me, or that verse, if you read that verse with this rendition, it gives you a certain hope even in these days. But if you read this, at the voice of Yahweh, it frightens the deer, and he strips the forest bare, while all in his temple will proclaim glory. It's like, okay, so maybe he's glorious. I'm not trying to put that down, but what does that do for you? This, I think, does something. And the point about this is that every verse in here can be done this with. You can reinterpret what he's saying. How much time do we have left? The timekeeper left. It's let me go through one other thing. The word for Gimel Nun Zion is the word for treasure, hideaway, secret, archives. Gimel Nun Zion Nun, stored, shelved, canceled, suspended. It's the word for a curator or the keeper, like a museum. You see, these concepts, I mentioned before at the very beginning, that if you don't know how to read the dictionary, you don't read Hebrew, just start reading words. So you come across a certain word, like this one, ganaz, and it means stored, shelved, canceled. Is it canceled, or is it apparently canceled? Suspended. What's been suspended? The treasure that's been hidden away in the archives. Archives of what? That has to do with things that are written or things that are stored. I would suggest to you that the things that I found is that Yahweh has hidden away the treasures that he promised to Israel, embedded, hidden in the archives of his word, of his literature, that if we knew how to read it, we could find it, and we could work righteousness to our good, intentionally playing into retrieving the promises, not being subject to those who would try to deceive us, as Moses warned us about. And how are they going to deceive us? With the very words that enlighten us. The reason we go back to these words is to get rid of the guys that would spin words and spin concepts and know that if they can scare us into leaving the words alone, or if they can trick us into throwing the words away by our own volition, we're left with nothing. And they're left keeping everything they were given on account of the fact that Israel threw away its covenant. There was something that I was going to try to get, and I haven't been able to get it yet. I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. I saw written that the Palestinian Charter, I think it was of 1968, might have been in 1964. I asked somebody to look at it and haven't had time to search the internet, but a friend of mine had a document which I read, and it says the Palestinians, under Arafat, I believe, said, we know that the Jews have been given the right to this land, but we also know that most of the Jews do wickedly, and that we, the Palestinians, have been given the right to pillage and plunder so long as they don't do the Torah. That's their curse. So let's have at it and wreck this place and kill as many as we can and steal as much as we can. I'm kind of ad-libbing what it says. While we can, which is to say, until they start doing the Torah, doing righteousness, in which case we got nothing because their Elohim will step in and we're done. Now, why do they know that and we don't? They know what's going on, but we don't. Why? Because we've been tricked into throwing it away. We've been given wrong words, wrong translations. And again, I'm not blaming King James or anybody else, because Yahweh said, you don't want my stuff? Fine, I'll take it away. You will forget you were ever my people. You will forget you ever were a participant in the rights and the privileges of the covenant. You will forget you were anything but a Norseman or an Englishman or an African or a whatever. Chinaman, from any country around the world, that's where you think you came from, because your genealogical descent has been hidden. And so people like Stephen Collins and Yair Davidi and various others have found that you can trace all these things back. Even a third of Japan apparently came from the descendants of Israel, from one reckoning. And it's like, who would have figured? It's been lost. It's been entangled like in a thick forest. It's like, the significance of this is not just studying history. It's going back to say, what did he say we can have? What do we have to do to get it? Because he's been defending his stuff. He's been defending it to keep us away from it, because we haven't been wanting or willing to do what he said. I mean, how many people have anybody ever talked to, and you try to talk to them about keeping the Shabbat or keeping the festivals, and it's like, whatever, or get out of my face, or I don't want anything to do with that covenant. That covenant was nailed to the cross. Somebody brought up the point last week. You're saying, what about, I think it was Colossians chapter 2, where it says, the ordinances which were against us were nailed to the cross. The ordinances which were against us were nailed to the cross. It's a paraphrase of the verse. It's like, Are these Torah instructions that tell us that we have a great treasure of wealth, of riches, of prestige, of honor, of riding the heights of Jacob? And you can say, heights of Jacob? What are the heights of Jacob? Look at the meaning of the word. The word Yaakov literally means to jump up and over obstacles, to be raised into the third dimension, which those who know geometry, you got the XY axis, which is on one plane, and the Z axis is the vertical. To be able to fly like Superman of some sort. Abraham himself means to have pinions of wings to fly. Yaakov, or Yitzhak, means to have laughter that's almost like a bird putting out its wings. There's almost these pictures of flying. There's another verse that says, who are these that fly like clouds, like doves to their coat windows? I mean, what did Yahweh promise to Israel that we have no clue about? To be given the heights of the inheritance of Yaakov is not just, the inheritance of Jacob. There's more to it. It's embedded in the language. We have no idea what we can get, what he wants to give his people. But there's another place, I think it might be Hosea. In fact, I was going to talk about Hosea, but it's not happening here. Read Hosea. Read Hosea. Jamie referenced Hosea in Hosea 1:10. That's actually 2 verse 1 according to the Southern Stone Tanakh translation, about where he comes up with fishing for soul, where he says, in the place where it was said to you, you are not my people, lo ami, it will be said to you, B'nai El-Chai, sons of the living Elohim. But another way to read that, we talked about this last Shabbat with some friends, El-Chai might be read as, I'm commanding you to live. Aleph Lamed means emotion toward, depending on the vowel points, or it can mean Elohim, but it means the power or the strength. And Chet Yod, as we talked about, Chai means life. So he says, I said, you are not my children. Get out of here. Leave my stuff alone. Get off my lawn. Lo ami. And we mentioned that the Lumi people, the similar phonetics, are a destitute tribe of Indians living up in Washington somewhere. Well, a couple years ago, when I first saw this stuff, I was over in Beaverton at a park, a neighborhood park. And it said right there, Lo ami. Lo ami. Oh, they're in Beaverton. It's like, did the people, maybe an Indian tribe that park was named after in Beaverton, were they from the descendants of Hosea, or did somebody else just pick up that name? I mean, why would you pick up that name? But I saw that as a prophetic fulfillment of saying, he said he would scatter his people across the face of the earth. But he also said he would bring them back. And if you read the story, for 50 years I read the Bible from a Christian perspective, and I never saw these stories. They're in there. Why don't we see them? Because we're trained to see a certain way. By looking at these letters, we're trying to see another way. I'm trying to give you a different set of lenses, spectacles to read. So we're talking about a text. We'll talk about one more thing. And again, I'm not sure how we're running in for time here. But if you look at Daniel 12:4, Daniel 12:5, it says, hide the words and seal the book until the time of the end. For many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And in the phrase, for many shall run to and fro, again, you won't see how it says that if you read the dictionary, but the word is Yod, Shin, Tet, Vav. Well, if you look in the dictionary, remember this is the letter Tet we're talking about, the full circle, the basket, 2 minutes. If you look at Tet, it has to do with apostasy, which is to say, heathen infiltration into the sacred Yashar doctrines of Yahweh's ways. Apostasy, which is going astray. And I believe this is the word that's translated, many shall run to and fro. But there's another way to read this. See, this is supposed to be like the class for the illiterates that don't know how to read. All we can do is look at pictures, right? Here's a picture of a hand, and it's actually, it's a strong hand. It's next to each letter, the Yod, a strong hand, and it talks about works. It grabs a tool. This is teeth. It's also fire. It's the Shin. Well, here's these two Tets, and this is a Vav. And the letter Vav, remember, is the number 6. It's also, like you might say, the man. The number 6, it's kind of like the bridge, right? Well, what are these two Tets? Well, this is something about running to and fro like apostasy, like frantically clamoring after any doctrine that might do something for you. And that many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. It has to do with the running to and fro, searching for knowledge. Is that what's going to have to do with these times? And we're talking about hide the words and seal the book until these times, and I'm suggesting that the answers are in the Paleo-Hebrew, in which case you could say, what's the alternative to running to and fro, searching for the truth, if the truth is what's been embedded in this Paleo-Hebrew that Daniel is told to hide, that we're having access to uncover and find out what the treasure is? You could say, well, what are these two texts? Well, if they really are, as it were, a shield, that which is around, right? You can look at the book of Revelation, and twice it says, those who will be protected, remember the verse? Those who keep the commandments of the covenant and the testimony of Yeshua. Two shields. Well, if somebody has two shields, you could say, this guy is safe from the hand-wielding fire or the hand-wielding teeth. If you have a sword in your hand, this is like a big sharp tooth. If you have a torch that you're about to burn their house down, that's the hand-wielding fire. Is the man behind the two shields of the commandments of the covenant and the testimony of Yeshua the one who will be safe from this coming destruction? Remember Noah in the ark. He sealed it with pitch, and when he went inside, it says Yahweh sealed the outside. Two seals. These are serious consequences for these days when who knows what kind of crazy stuff is about to happen. But we're trying to go back and say, I believe there's a message of hope. It's not just a message of despair, but there is a verse, more than one, where Yahweh says, when he goes to pull his people out from the nations amongst whom they've been scattered, he will bring to ruin those nations where they were scattered, the same way as the picture of him ruining Egypt. And there's another verse that we don't have time to go to because it's time to quit here, but it talks about in Hosea that says, we will not trust in Assyria, but we will trust in Yahweh. Well, we don't trust in Assyria. Assyria was the northern kingdom of like northern Iraq. But I'll tell you, the World Bank, the IMF, the United States looks like Assyria. They were the military powerhouse that everybody in the world cringed from. And I'm telling Israel right now, do not trust in the United States. Do not trust in the horses, in the tanks, in the F-16s. Trust in Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, our Elohim. It's our only hope.